Okay, we are here with Nicola Leyland today, and Nicola has a really interesting, touching, tough story that she something that what she's lived through and that she's going to share about today. But I'm not sure, could you just please put in the chat whether you have watched the little video replay, the little video about her story, which was on the Sunday playlist? So if just say yes or no. If you haven't seen it, if enough of you haven't seen it, we will play it again right now. So, okay, Chris, because we've got most of them have seen it. Christine hasn't, and Beth hasn't. Would you like me to show it again? It's only a short video. Okay, and let me just go and get that then. I'll just screen share. Where's it gone? There it is. Share the sound. And just give me a thumbs up if it's going, you know, when you can see it and if it's working as it should.
A freak accident. My son was kicked in the head by a horse. A life-transforming moment in time. The rescue from a field, the loss of consciousness, the stretcher, the ambulance, the scans, the fractured skull, and the fear of mortality. The days in high dependency, the panic and stress. My 8-year-old son. His release from hospital and the casual comment from the neurosurgeon that he could return to school the following week. The emotional turmoil of my boy and of myself. The impossible entwining of pain, sleepless nights and agonized days. Ambiguous grief. He wanted to go to school, and so he tried it 2 months after the accident. But even on that first day, he was so overwhelmed and breathing strangely. I wish, in retrospect, that first day had also been his last. His desire to go to school faded quickly, and soon he didn't want to attend at all. The boy who had previously loved school, and who had been loved by school. His experience was so different now, but the teachers couldn't see it. He was frozen in fear and was overwhelmed. But these were internal struggles and sensations, invisible to most. He took neuropsychological tests and had significantly diminished vocabulary and comprehension. His maths ability hadn't declined. He's too good at maths to have a brain injury. He reluctantly managed 2 days a week at school, but those days brought extreme behavioural challenges, head banging on the wall, hours to settle, crying, aggression, loss of control. Me writing to school and to his neuropsychologist most weeks, illustrating his beyond extreme behaviour. They couldn't believe me and insisted my son was fine at school. A sense of professional conspiracy. Doctor listens to teacher and teacher listens to doctor, but neither listen to me. Family don't understand. They too are more interested in what the teacher and doctor have to say. Me losing my voice and losing my mind. The sense that no one is helping him and no one can see what it's like for us. The scaffolding holding my mind together just crumbled and collapsed. One day I was reading a story to my son and daughter, and the book asked them to make a wish. My son hesitantly said, "I wish never to return to school again." I made that wish come true, and I took my daughter out of school too.
Sorry if it's lagging. Hopefully it'll come back in a minute. Bad timing. It's been doing very well.
We backed away from the world. We developed our own.
I'm just going to wait, let it buffer a little bit. We're not far from the end.
I think it paused in a very good spot, actually, because I think it's nice to think that that was the moment that everything changed.
Yeah. I've just taken back a little bit. I don't know whether something's happened on my Wi-Fi suddenly to just quickly to just slow that down. So we'll try again in a minute.
I can always fill it in with my real voice.
Yes.
I can just tell you the rest of the story.
Yes, you can. I don't know why, it's just one of those things.
Of course
it's
it
nice
is.
when it works, but it doesn't always work.
Exactly.
Okay, so we'll stop the share there because some of the people have been to watch it. So this video is on a playlist, so you can go and watch it. And it is a very sweet and touching video, very nicely made.
Yeah, well, it's easy for people to come back and see it, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so Nicola, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the accident itself? And I mean, that must have been quite a traumatic thing as it is, because at the time, obviously, you don't have much time to think. You're just dealing with what's immediately in front of you, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all seared in place in my brain. Lots of images about what happened. I wasn't there when it happened, and in fact, both my kids were with friends at my mum's house with my ex-husband. So there was a whole setup that didn't include me because I was at home working. So then during the afternoon, my ex-husband had phoned me and said, oh, the boys are playing in a field with horses. It's so idyllic. And honestly, my blood ran cold. And I said, well, they shouldn't be in there. And it is interesting that I had a couple of premonitions that day, and that, Rick, my ex-husband, doesn't even remember that phone call, because that's what trauma does. It removes information that it doesn't need.
Yeah.
When something suddenly happens, you'll find that, well, my son has like a 24-hour amnesia surrounding the accident, and my ex-husband definitely has a period of time that you just don't remember. Your brain just goes into a different zone, and you're not putting down memories. You're in action, instant, extreme panic mode. So anyway, he doesn't remember that phone call, but anyway, he phoned me about half an hour after he'd phoned me the first time saying, Isaac's been kicked in the head by a horse. He's unconscious. I've called the ambulances. So I got in the car, 10-minute drive. It's a 12-minute drive usually. I think I probably did it in about 9, shouting at all the cars on the way, because obviously you just want everyone to move out of your way. Let me get there as fast as I can. And Isaac was in my mum's house on the sofa in the living room. He was completely unconscious. His clothes were being cut off him by the ambulance paramedics, and Rick had to carry him in from a field through the hedges and into the house. So, quite a visual and dramatic moment. And then he went off. The ambulance took him to the John Radcliffe. I went and delivered all the children, the kids' friends who'd been playing. I took them home and then went off to the hospital as well. Yeah, it was quite a day. I've got a lot of memories of that day, a lot of memories. Funny enough, having said that you don't put down memories, I did, and that when I arrived in the hospital, the main doctor that was dealing with Isaac took us off to a quiet room and showed us the scan, and he said, well, Isaac's got a brain, he's got a skull fracture and we can see bleeding in his brain, and we don't know what you're going to get out of this. And that those words that you think, oh, what does that mean? It could mean anything at all. And I was wearing a jumper because I'd been working in my house. It was November, it was cold, so the house was cold. I'd been wearing a thick jumper, and it was the worst thing to be wearing in hospital. I was just feeling hot and dizzy and overwhelmed, and I just wanted to be wearing a t-shirt, and that was just like, oh, please, I wish I could just change out of this stupid hot jumper. But that's so irrelevant. And yet I remember that moment. It's so it is what it is.
Yeah. And at the time you didn't quite know what the outcome was, what would lie ahead, and there was quite a long recovery.
Well, yes, he only actually spent 6 nights in hospital. because he did recover relatively fast, 3 in high dependency and then 3 in a children's ward. And it was the neuropsychologist that saw him in the children's ward it was the neurosurgeon, sorry. And she said to me, he can go to school next week. And I've thought about that so many times since and wondered why she would say such a thing. But I think it's because hospital isn't really necessarily stretching the person. So Isaac was only lying in bed and talking. His emotional responses weren't visible to her, and his movement wasn't actually visible to her. You know, there was not much that she could see from that position, which is why she thought he was okay. But actually, he was very much not okay. And that was so obvious the following week when his emotions were high and low and everything in between. And he couldn't eat properly and he couldn't remember most of his words. I mean, he was in no fit state to go anywhere other than the safety of home.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, obviously we didn't send him back that week, but we did 2 months later. And that was also at least a year too early. Had I only known, you know, but I didn't know. And this is the story.
And they kind of said, well, he'll be able to go back to school in what sort of, it was a ridiculous amount of time really from after the trauma of that accident, it seemed to me.
It was ridiculous. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What on earth were they thinking? But, you know, they don't see what you see. They don't follow it up the way you follow it up. You know, to them, it'll be 6 months later that someone comes back and says, oh, well, we did go back to school and it didn't really work out. They don't see actually what happened the following day. They can't witness what the result of their comments were.
And there's something about the parental instinct as a parent where you actually know something's not right, isn't there? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We have huge instinct and intuition.
Yeah. I you know, because I had a similar situation with one of my children in hospital, slightly, you know, different circumstances, but just really being treated like, you know, we're the experts, you know, and it's kind of disempowering really, where, you know, you're kind of made to second guess your own thoughts and instincts on it. So tell us a bit about, so after that period, so, you know, there were a lot of things, there was an impact on you.
Oh my goodness.
Talk me through that journey.
I think it was very reflected between Isaac and I. I think I went through almost as big a trauma as him, and the recovery has been very, very similar. We both completely fell apart psychologically, and I think we both recovered psychologically quite well. But it was quite a long falling apart. I mean, the falling apart was a couple of years. I would say it just continued to get worse for over a year for me, and probably for a bit longer for Isaac. And then it was the journey of recovery, which the film does cover, but didn't today. But the recovery journey is, you know, is real. It did happen. But yeah, the falling apart was just amazing, because that whole time from the day of the accident for a couple of months, I couldn't sleep. So you're already in a completely rubbish place, because if you can't sleep, you're operating on a real lack of capacity to think and, you know, to make rational decisions. I'd been running a business, so I was still trying to run my business. And in the end, I had to cancel that, shut it all down. But it did take me quite a long time for that to just fully play out, that I could work out a way of shutting it down and stop stressing myself out by running a business when I couldn't even, you know, I couldn't do the most basic of things. Yeah, I'll never forget, I went off to buy some shopping one day and I couldn't remember my PIN number, and it was just dawned on me that I was in no way working. You know, this lack of sleep plus the stress of your child that you've, you know, nurtured so carefully for 8 years is suddenly a totally different person. And that is very hard to compute, very, very hard to.
Yeah, and you weren't home educating at that point.
No, he was at school. So, I mean, no, we weren't home educating. He was at school. He actually loved school. He was a character that really thrived on the routine and the regularity and the fact that he was capable of it. So for Isaac, it was a successful thing going into school. He really, really enjoyed, you know, every element of it. it wasn't that he was cocky. He may have ended up cocky by this age, but at that age, he was just competent. You know, he was just capable of handling it. So he obviously wanted to go back. And that was another thing. So I was the only person who didn't think he should go back. Come January, he wanted to go back. My family thought he should go back. The doctor obviously thought he should go back, and the school obviously wanted him back. So mine was a very lone voice. And in fact, you know, I hesitated to believe in myself totally. So I let him go back in January. He came out the first day and he was in total stress. And I didn't realize that that meant how awful it had been for him. I didn't know then as much as I do now about response to trauma, what it feels like to be uncomfortable. I didn't know anything. And yet now I'm very, very well read. I've done so much research now into, you know, trauma and brain injury and emotional stress. And I used to be thinking, what is it about school that's bothering him so much? You know, is it the academic work? But of course it wasn't. It was everything. You know, it was the having to get ready on time to go in. It was getting dressed. It was going up to the school door. It was feeling lost in his lessons. It was not being able to keep his friendships. It was losing all his stuff. It was having to eat in public at lunchtime. It was playing a bit crazily in the playground. Not, you know, he'd lost a lot of his capacities. So he didn't understand getting on with people, but he didn't understand speed. You know, he would come home with loads of bruises from running into walls because he'd lost all his judgment, but he didn't realize he had. So he would go and play football as he had before, but of course he couldn't. And it's just unbelievable that he was put through that, isn't it? It's unbelievable that he was, you know, can you imagine it if it was you going back to a place that you felt secure, comfortable and capable, but as a new person who's only 8 and who isn't capable of any of those things. You know, it's just hard to imagine that wouldn't be psychologically traumatic. So the psychological trauma of going back to school is as big as his brain injury.
And of course, you're also dealing with trying to get help medically.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, I've met a wall of people who felt the same way, an absolute wall, psychologists, neuropsychologists, and his teachers, all of whom thought more school, more school, more school. He's quiet, he's contained at school. The teacher, you know, or he's the same child, even though he clearly wasn't. Just unbelievable, just this incredible lack of insight. And so my brain has been analysing that for years now. Why do people do that? Why are they doing that? You know, why are they all telling me something that isn't true, isn't my experience? They're not listening to me, you know, and I think it's this cultural indoctrination. I literally think that once you've gone to study to be a doctor and followed the book and followed the book and followed the book, your brain is so full of the book that you're not actually attached to what's presenting in front of you. You're like, you know, you're just indoctrinated. And I think the same for the teachers. There's a certain amount of just indoctrination that means that you can't allow stories that aren't as you expect them to come in. You know, there's no space for that. So I was seen as a difficult parent. I was seen as argumentative. And yet all I was doing was trying to assert my son's rights and try to express his situation. So I'm still on that journey of understanding why the doctors, psychologists, neuropsychologists, you know, why they were so unhelpful. I'm still trying to understand that, because to me it's, you know, it's almost, well, from my experience, it would have all been much easier if they didn't exist. So all these people being paid a salary and working that are supposed to be helping, from my point of view, it would have been better if they hadn't been there at all.
Yeah, there was an interesting quote that one of the speakers, I'm actually just trying to find it now, because it was from a Holocaust survivor. And it was to do with, and I have actually shared this on Facebook somewhere because I thought it was such a good quote, where this Holocaust survivor was basically saying, you know, if you've got all this education and you're not human, you You know, what's the point of all this education if you raise, you know, basically saying, you know, if you're a psychopath or a, you know, if you're very skilled, if you're not human, the most important thing to be is to be human. Raise your children to be humans. And I wish I could find it, because it was such an apt thing. And I think this is the thing, is that there's a loss of humanity. Sometimes it comes with these professions where it's systemic.
It is.
It's systemic, and there's an infantilizing of the person in front of you, and then we gaslight them because, quite frankly, they're a bit of a nuisance, and we'd like to just clear them off our schedule so we don't have to deal with them anymore. Perhaps we don't have the answers, and we don't want to say we don't have the answers. And or we think they don't know what they're talking about. And I think there is a bit of that. So at some point the wheels come off.
Yes.
Yeah.
In my life and in their lives, I suspect.
Yes. And so you decided to take him out of school. So you know, so kind of tell us a little bit more about that. You know, what sort of led to that. And
yes, I mean, I left it going for too long, but that's what happened. You know, he stayed in school till July, and honestly, by the July term, that was the worst period ever of him. He was developing tics. He was aggressive, upset, traumatized. He would bang his head on the bed after school for hours. He would just be completely unreachable for hours. If he'd gone to school, then the 3 hours after school, I might be following him around the cricket field, you know, for 3 hours before he can even get in the car with me, because he's so lost and so distressed. They were incredibly hard things to deal with. And then my ex-husband didn't understand at all what I was saying either. And he was completely sure that if it was him that had gone to collect him from school, it wouldn't have happened like that, which is also gaslighting. And unbelievably unhelpful.
Yeah.
So actually 6 months after the accident, my husband and I went from a period of kind of being a relationship that got on to me not being able to say a thing to him. You know, it's funny how it happens. But if you're met constantly by people who don't understand you, you just end up shutting down. What's the point talking if you can't understand me? And that's what happened in my relationship with my husband. And he moved out about 6 months after that. So roughly, you know, a year and a bit after the accident. And I never, ever felt understood by him, which, you know, apparently following trauma, child trauma, it either pulls you together or blows you apart. And this was that, obviously. And so the summer holidays, Isaac seemed to settle. Slowly. He gradually became less wild, less reactive, less impulsive, less out of control, less emotional, all these things. And then September came, and it was September that I think is often the time that people think, right, homeschool is the thing to do, because September's the contrast between a long summer holiday when the child was being themselves safe at home with their family. In an ideal world, for me, that was the case. And then suddenly September, and he wouldn't go, and he didn't want to go. And the headmistress pulled him out the car one day, and the school was just, he must be in. We don't see anything that you see. And I was just like, well, you know, they're either going to be burying me, or I've got to start acting with some confidence and capacity and ability, taking things on my own shoulders. Otherwise, I will not live through the year even. You know, the low was very, very low. As you can imagine, from so many, you know, how much can one person handle? The child that you love so much has changed so much, and no one understands or is even trying to understand. You're just like, oh my God. So yes, he came out in the September, and Heidi, my daughter, came out at the same time. She was a couple of years younger than him. And then that was the homeschooling journey beginning. But obviously it wasn't about school, it was about recovery. And it hasn't really been about school ever since. It's always been about recovery. I've done a lot of work into brain health, a lot of work into well-being, psychological health. I've done lots of therapy myself now, but actually using the philosophy that to lead them, I need to be fixed. And also that Isaac has a brain injury and I have obviously a psychological breakdown, and perhaps the same methods will fix both of us. You know, perhaps the more I learn, because I'm an adult, I can read books, go on courses, learn, whereas he's, you know, between the ages of 8 and now 16, he's much less likely to do all that reading. So I did the reading and embodied and learned and then used it to change myself and to change him. So it's been a very educational, life-changing, completely transformational recovery journey. Very kind of isolated and lonely, but luckily for me, there's the internet, and luckily for me, it's, you know, the era that it is. And there's so much information out there, and there's so many groups, there's so many, you know, there's so many ways you can find of learning to get better.
Yeah. Would you say that that sort of home education kind of opened up a new way for you to handle things, and was part of that recovery journey, and just getting into a better headspace for yourself? You know, would you attribute that to that decision?
Yeah, I think it was absolutely pivotal. I think that's the absolute thing. The stability that we stood on was the fact that it was legal to home educate. That was our foundations on which we could stand. If I had to fight for rights for him to get assessed for an ECHP or for him to access therapy, if I'd had to fight for that whilst he was still going through being, you know, I mean, I couldn't fight for it anyway. I never fought for any of that, and just decided I wouldn't bother, because if his teachers and doctors couldn't see what was going on, it didn't seem very likely that I would get an ECHP.
And then you're wasting years and months.
And stress.
Yeah.
The stress of navigating that system, and you're constantly waiting for the next appointment, and you're constantly thinking you do this, and you're paying money for your own little assessments. And to me, that wasn't in any way possible. For me, it was like, right, well, we're just going to do it on our own. We are not going to
abandon ship.
Doors.
Yeah, abandon ship, jump on that life raft and paddle as fast as you can for freedom.
Yeah.
Because I think it is true. The thing is there are a lot of people that would keep their child in school and then keep trying to fight the system. But what is happening, I mean, a child's life is quite short in the big scheme of things. And, you know, to take, you know, months and months, if you look at CAMS, their waiting list at the moment can be like up to 18 months. And in all that time, what is happening with that child? What is embedding? What is shaping that child's thoughts and feelings about themselves? You know, and coming out of that, it seems like, you know, you were able to just take your time and heal and kind of reconnect in relationship, which actually relationship is so key, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that was one of the lessons I learned along the way, was that the mother's power and influence with their child is beyond anyone else's. We have these powers as long as we're accessible to the child, and as long as we're around the child. We're the ones who, by being ideally calm and balanced and not ill in an ideal world, you know, we can help the child to stabilize and feel comfortable and feel at ease. I reckon it did take me probably a couple of years, maybe 3 years, to actually reach that place where I could be beneficial to Isaac by my presence. But on the other hand, those 2 or 3 years, I wasn't making it worse. I may not have been fully embodying what I would now, which is an attitude of pure, you're perfect, you're fine, you're completely fine, and, you know, pure allowance and space, acceptance and love. You know, I wasn't then who I am now, but I was on my way. And Isaac, I mean, he had a lot of basic work to do, which actually was a lot of sleeping. He lived in the living room of my house for 2 years, which seemed to be what he needed to do. I think it was because the TV was in the lounge and he didn't have any computers in his room, and he couldn't bear not to be kind of listening to something when he fell asleep, which was anxiety and trauma related.
Yeah.
So he would lie on the sofa and watch TV and then fall asleep with the TV on. And it was because his mind was so incredibly full of trauma, and he was so broken that you know, he couldn't face reality. But that all moved on, you know, everything moved on. I got him a computer, I think for his 14th birthday, and he had that in the living room, and he played really, really basic things on the computer, and I think he was just putting his brain back together. He played mechanical games that were really slow and really young, and gradually he was just putting the building blocks back in place that he'd lost. And he, you know, I still read to him for hours, and I would read to him and my daughter, and honestly his taste in books had regressed by, you know, 4 years, and he liked the really young fairy books that my daughter liked. He was regressed, he was several years younger, and stuff like Frozen came out at that period, and he was scared to watch Frozen.
Wow.
You know, which was related to the regression and the trauma, any sense of anticipation now, and he kind of has a bit of a meltdown. He's terrible at handling anticipation, but you know, he's got a very complex brain now that's gone through so much, and it has put itself back together, but it's still, you know, I reckon there will be personality disorders kind of brewing up in there.
Well, I kind of think, like, if he'd been in school that whole time, you know, how would his brain have put itself back? What other things would have been added in there? What other little, you know, if you think of a Lego structure, if you put a little toothpick between the blocks, it's not going to be quite right, you know, and it's never going to sit straight. And, you know, he might not have those Lego blocks sitting straight, but you know, if he'd been in school, there would have been toothpicks all over the place, making just really complicating that picture and probably exacerbating some of the issues. And
I mean, definitely.
And I imagine you didn't worry too much about like schoolwork, or, you know, like feeling like you needed to put anything on him that he had to do.
No. Well, he didn't need anything adding, and also I did have an intuition about autonomy. I did have an intuition that he was going to be the one who fixed himself, and I had a strong intuition and sense. I mean, I did with my daughter as well. I haven't actually put schoolwork on her either. I just trusted their autonomous journey and my own, and it kind of reflects back to childhood and school myself, that I always resented being told what to do and being guided, and I always felt that people were getting in the way of my own thought processes. And I think that sense of people are getting in the way of the way I want to think, I've used that for my kids. You know, I recognize it so strongly that actually I prefer to think the way I want to think, and I don't want you giving me ideas randomly and making me think about subjects that I don't want to think about in ways I don't want to think about them, you know. So my childhood also has a certain resonance with this, which is useful, because it means that I can give them their freedom, honoring their freedom, because it means so much to me. You know, there's this
well, the thing is, you're giving them agency. So, you know, the thing is, when you're under sort of medical treatment or anything like that, the one thing you don't have is a lot of agency. So you've got all these people making decisions for you, and he was already in a situation that was out of his control. So being able to give him that autonomy and that agency, you giving him back some control.
Actually, and it's so basic and it's so simple and it requires so little, and yet it's the thing that you need, because it's the building block at the bottom. It's the most important building block, is that agency and control. You know, and now I think, you know, he's got such an amazing character, and actually a real fascinating picture that I'll throw at you is the Child Brain Injury Trust produced a book, and in their book they say that the commonest thing to happen following brain injury is kids go back to school, and over time the difference between them and their peers gets wider and wider and wider, so they fall further and further apart. Whereas what's happened with Isaac isn't that. You know, when he went back to school, the difference between him and his peers did grow wider, but by coming home, resting, building his own autonomy, he's now working at a complete level with his peers.
Yes, and how old is he now?
So he's 16, and actually he is doing some lessons. So he's studying maths and science, and he's halfway through a GCSE course in maths and science, and he's perfectly capable and loves it, gets on well with the other students on the course and with the teachers. And the teacher says, you know, gosh, Isaac's actually a leader. He teaches everyone how to do everything if they can't do it. You know, he always follows how to navigate computer log-on changes and all that kind of thing.
That's amazing, because I was going to ask you, how is he doing now? And that thing which you're saying where that gap has narrowed, I mean, he's almost like there.
Yeah.
But that's because, you know, like I think in home education and giving them that agency and the autonomy, having that time to heal, when he's ready, everything can kick in as it should.
Exactly.
You know?
And that's academically. So socially, he goes out once a week to a social group that's in the village. He has a couple of friends that he speaks to online and plays with online quite a lot, as they do. He won't go anywhere really. So he does have psychological issues. And I'm hoping that there will be a moment to approach them in a different way. I don't really know, but he won't go on holiday. He won't go shopping. He won't go to the next town for cinema. He's very, very socially restricted. So thank goodness for online lessons, you know, for the online world.
Yeah. And the thing is their people are like that without anything ever having happened to them. You know, it's he is a slightly different version of himself.
Yeah.
But, you know, to me, what is so powerful about the story is the fact that here you've got a child that could have potentially have had something extremely life-limiting. And through, you know, just having that wisdom and recognizing what your family needed, listening properly, you know, you've been able to actually reclaim for yourself, actually. You've used your own autonomy, reclaimed your family, reclaimed your child. And given them a fighting chance, you know, given them that chance to heal. And it's actually incredibly powerful, because we talk, you know, most of us, you know, we home educate, it's just part of our normal life, you know, we make the decision. And yet it seems there could be a huge benefit to home educating a child that has been through something traumatic. That no research has ever been done on. That would actually make a great topic. No research has been done,
and actually no one is willing to listen either. You know, I've talked to the Child Brain Injury Trust about this. They really don't want to hear it.
Oh, really?
You know, and I've talked to a few mums. I set up a Facebook group a few years ago to collect mums with children with brain injury, and I talked about the beauty of being autonomous and giving your child space, but everyone was so attached to what the teachers said and what the professionals said that they couldn't find their own autonomy in there. They were like, oh no, but the teachers said we've got to do this. Oh no, my doctor says we've got to do this. And they were so scared and terrified, which is understandable, but they were really trapped and limited and not realizing that actually, no, you can step sideways. You know, yes, you won't get any support. You won't get any money. You won't get, you know, you will have to make sacrifices in terms of what work you can do, but you're stopping stressing your child. You're stopping stress now, and that will help your child to recover.
And we see benefits for children who've been emotionally damaged as well. So, you know, adopted children, huge benefits just to be able to get that attachment with their family. And even with children with disabilities, Down syndrome children, that kind of thing, being able to be in the home, they actually just have it gives them such an amazing, you know, just unique way of being brought up, but actually knowing they're loved, having that relationship, and having a uniquely tailored experience. And I'm not going to say educational experience, it's just an experience, because you know, you learn anyway. But I do want to go through some of the comments and the questions that are in the chat, because there have been some. So Amy, if you could repost the link to Nicola's Facebook group, so if anyone wants to go and join that group. And I think if you know of families that are dealing with something like this, even if it's not you, you know, you can send them Nicola's way. So we've got her group. Then, okay, so Amy initially said, it's the age-old dilemma that those who were successful at school went on to get those jobs, and therefore they can't see that anything other than school is good for a child. That was when we were talking about the doctors and the nurses and the psychologists. And then Rachel said, in all the services I've had to engage with regard to my son who had PTSD from school trauma, I am not considered an expert on my own child. Home ed is saving him and giving him the time he needs. It's so difficult to engage with services that are supposed to help and support you, yet don't believe you. And Sally says that maybe your husband was right, that your son would have behaved different with him, because children more often let go of their vigilant, self-suppressing behaviors when they are in their safe space. And maybe you were more his safe space than his dad. And I do think there are some intuitions sometimes that a mum has, not to, I mean, there's some dads with great intuition too, but it's, I think that connection from birth, you know, that a mum has with their child is very, very strong. Sally says he could sense you're really trying to tune into his true needs and feelings rather than what the experts were telling you about him. So he knew he was safe with you. Amy spoke about the few from PTSD who have PTSD from school attend the local group and they're able to adapt it there. And we don't understand why schools can't do the same, because they're meant to be more inclusive than exclusive. That's what they're supposed to teach, but they don't. Okay, some more about the EHCP. But I think the EHCP is only worth anything if you're going to get any help from the school, which is questionable. Yeah, and Rachel says here her experience is far removed from that reality. And once you've got it in place, there's this annual review, and then you end up having to tick somebody else's boxes again. Sally said, what a blessing that he had you in his corner and you were able to take things into your own hands. So much respect to you for taking that plunge, even though you weren't yet feeling resourced and ready within yourself. So much courage. Okay, so I'm just going to move down to some questions. And we had, how old is he now? Sounds like an amazing young man, and you've answered that. Then Amy asked, would you have ever home educated if this hadn't happened, do you think? And let's answer that one first.
Yeah, we can go there, because I actually, quite interestingly, there is a high chance I would have done, but it's hard to know. So Heidi, my daughter, was literally diagnosed with autism last week. So Heidi didn't like school. She started in reception and then came out. So she went in for a few days, came out. She went in after her 5th birthday. So she was quite young. So she went in before her 5th birthday, came out, went in at her 5th birthday, didn't like it. Tried year 1, was very sporadic, tended to average 1 or 2 days a week, didn't like it at all, never wanted to go in. So bizarrely, I had no idea it was autism. I hadn't done any research into autism at that stage. No awareness of what autism looked like at all. So it would have taken me quite a long time to figure out what was going on with Heidi. But because she never liked school, and because Isaac was coming out, it was obvious to take her out at the same time. But I think I saved her. I think I saved her as much as I saved Isaac, because I think it, bizarrely, to reflect back on it, I think it took 3 or 4 years to overcome the exposure to school she'd had. And it was only part-time for a year and a bit, but it had changed her mental health in that time. I've got a much healthier girl now in terms, and it really scares me to imagine what 4 years might have been like, given one and a half.
She's younger than Isaac, right?
She's just about to be 14.
Yeah, so good timing, really, I think, for her.
Unbelievable timing for her. Really, really good, because I think she would have had a breakdown at a very early age, actually. Yeah. She can't, so she doesn't go to home ed groups because she doesn't like groups. She doesn't do lessons because she doesn't like lessons. I have to be really, really creative with Heidi, and hence Amy's comment about her being entrepreneurial, because that's been the way we've gone. You know, she makes jewelry and sells it, and she's set up a business and does stuff, but it's all very circuitous. I haven't been able to do anything in any kind of normal way that any normal child, if there is such a thing.
Well, I mean, if you look at Harriet Patterson talks about the different learning curves. She says the learning curves don't look, you know, sometimes they're like this and sometimes they're like, you know, she had different illustrations of it. And I think the whole thing is that, you know, it's the scarring that happens. So sometimes if you wait too long to take them out, it's all that emotional scarring that you then still have to work on. So there was a follow-up after the would you have ever home educated? Do you think you'd have missed out in some way, or would have school have been great without the accident?
Well, it's a really interesting story. I think Heidi definitely only thrived having come out. Isaac, had he not had the accident, I think we would be looking at a very typical. So he had to give up football at the same time, obviously, because he couldn't play football after his accident. And he was very good at football and loved it and attached a lot of personal identity to football. But without the accident, I'm sure he would be sporty. I'm sure he would be equally academic that he still is, or that he has become again. So I think the academic side, socially, well, I don't know. I mean, I think he would have been, there was nothing outstanding about him except that he was kind of an all-round good, all-round good. I'm sure he would have been good looking, and I'm sure he would have attracted girlfriend. I just think, so one of his friends is at school, and he's lucky because this friend is in our village, and this friend is a really accepting of difference, and he's stayed in Isaac's court all the way along.
Yeah.
And he's just so supportive. So we have this insight into what Isaac could have been,
Yeah.
He would have just followed the society treadmill.
Yeah. It's hard to know. You've got to deal with what's in front of you, really,
And it doesn't matter at all, because what we've got is absolutely great. He's very happy, he's very funny, he's got a huge sense of humor. He's got loads and loads of character traits that are amazing, and it doesn't matter that it's different. But obviously 8 years ago I didn't think that.
Well, I think I think you just you have to be thankful actually that somehow you've rescued yourself. The situation's been redeemed from what it could have been, So Nick has said something here about the worst is being not listened to and being disbelieved and dismissed. And I experienced something similar. I had a child born prematurely, and I had to really fight, just advocate for my baby in that situation to make sure he got the care that he needed. And that, I think, is partly actually why I'm the person I am today. Where I feel so strongly about advocating for our children, and championing them. And it's so Nick has said huge respect to you, Nicola, and everything you've done and achieved for your son. Sally has had to leave, so she apologized. She'll catch up later. So what I wanted to ask you, just as we kind of need to move into Rachel has said, do you still have to explain yourself to professionals, or is that settled down? Do they listen to you now? Or have you never been back to them?
I don't think I would go to a professional about Isaac. I mean, I've had to with Heidi's autism diagnosis in the last 6 months, and that's been an interesting journey, but it's been completely fine. But I did pay for it privately because I didn't trust going through the system at all. So it's left me with a strong distrust of the system, and I just wanted the truth, not to have to work out why people say what they're saying.
Have you ever had any validation from any professionals, those that you have paid privately and so on?
Now Isaac, I paid for a educational psychologist report a couple of years ago, and she definitely completely loads of validation. And then about a few months after Isaac came out of school, I got a brain injury occupational therapist came up, and had she come earlier, that would have been a great thing. They respond to what the hospital says to them. So had the hospital said Isaac needs a brain injury occupational health, she could have come within the first 4 months, and that would have made a huge difference. But because they didn't think that this was an issue, they didn't think he had a brain injury, it took a lot longer. I had to go back into the system and say, look, we're still having problems. We got our brain injury, and she's written a great report. I mean, that was back, within the first year, after all the fallout. And she said, as soon as I saw him, I knew he had a brain injury.
I know. And I know this
How could that be true?
But it's the harm, the harm that gets done through not listening, and how that you know, undermines you, and it just makes you second guess yourself, actually, and start doubting your own instincts.
I literally lost my voice, didn't I? So the great thing that's happening now is that I made that film, and I took that film I entered it into a film competition for brain injury and won.
Oh, wonderful.
So
congratulations.
I know that film actually was shown to a team of brain injury specialists, you know, professors, doctors, nurses, occupational therapists. It was on stage.
Wonderful.
I went on stage and got it. So that was huge because, you know, it showed how painful it is. And I'm going to write a book now.
Oh,
so,
I really think you should. I do really think you should. And, you know, when you look back on all of this, like what do you take away from it? What kind of, you know, you look back and you sort of, how do you summarize? I mean, how do you look back and sort of say, you know, that, you know, what did it show you? What did it teach you? What did you personally kind of discover from this whole experience?
And that is just beyond, you know, it's just beyond imagining that I could have transformed and changed so much, and welcomed that it happened to us, because I've learned so much. I've had to question so much, but I've learned so much, and I am in a completely different place now. And I think I can help other families where the similar thing has happened, but also just be so strong and true to myself in a way that I don't think I ever was, because I wasn't as connected with this trust in yourself, connect to the world and trust in yourself, and just keep going when it's tough.
Yeah.
All these things. I mean, it's completely transformational, and it's a complete gift. It's incredible that I can get to this place where I think, gosh, who would I have been without the accident? Would I have, you know, still have been working as a travel agent, still feeling stressed and handling all that work? Kids pushed out of the house, stress, you know, just being in
would you even have had that relationship that you've come to value with your children so much?
No.
And I think that is the thing that for me is that, you know, it's the word redemption means you're taking something that is like gone, lost, and you're bringing something new. You know, you kind of like, it's like, you know, you go and rescue an animal or something and you bring them back to life and you love them back to life. It's that kind of like where you're taking something that could be really disastrous and actually turning it into something very special and precious. And it's that kind of story, and it's what it does for you as a person, what you learn. And the power of you sharing your story is that there are people who will watch your story and will be so encouraged and so inspired, and it may be just the thing they need to help them take that step towards a more healing lifestyle for their family. And that's why I feel it's so important. I'm very, very big on share your stories and be real, because we don't help anybody when we keep our stories to ourselves. And it is an incredibly powerful story. I've put the link to the film in the chat, but it is also, if you go on to the all events on the Sunday playlist, it's in there as well. And I think I might have linked to it in your little talk as well. I think I put a link there as well. So it's everywhere, you know, they can go watch it. And I did love all the Playmobil and your beautiful little Playmobil sets that you must have, your little medical ones and everything.
Well, that was
a good way to tell the story.
Well, so that's another thing that's come out of it was, you know, I did it as a project with Heidi, because I spend so much time with Heidi. So she was the set designer.
Wonderful.
And she went through it lots of times. And obviously going through the story with her was so beneficial, because she really understands the story, having gone through it so many times. She understands that that's what happened.
Yeah.
Whereas often you forget to go back and talk about it properly and tell the story as it is. Isaac's seen it and loved it. And Heidi and I are doing another filmmaking project at the moment where we're making a documentary about our dog having puppies. So it's kind of sprung up a whole
little industry
of playing,
enjoyment
of playing creatively. So, you know, because making films is actually just loads of fun.
Yes. And I thought it was a really good way to tell the story, because it's very visually appealing and strong. And you know, the way you have the figures turn their back you know, on the figure that represents you. It's very, very powerful. And I just think it is an excellent, you know, story to share. It's difficult and hard that you had to go through that.
Of course.
And nobody would wish that on anybody.
Yeah, of course.
But to have hope, such hope come out of it, and such faith and love and all of that come out of it. And that is something just really just amazing. And I just, you know, we need more people to share their stories and to kind of encourage those that are going through difficulties, because they do feel alone, and you could have really done with a friend like you.
Yeah,
back
absolutely.
in the day, you know.
Absolutely. And when it comes to, you know, opposing the schools bill and the details in the schools bill, it helps to hear how many people are homeschooling and for what reason.
Yes, yes. And I think that is kind of why we have to fight for it. We do have to fight, because the number of children that stand to be harmed and damaged by these measures, if they go forward, it doesn't bear thinking about. So Rachel has also thanked us for this being so thoughtfully presented. So thank you for that comment, Rachel. We appreciate it. And we do hope you'll share this with other people that you know of. If you know of anyone who's going through something similar, I think, you know, it helps that you know about Nicola's story, and you can share that as an encouragement to others. Thank you very much, everyone.